So back at the shop for another day and back to working on the Chev after a bit of a hiatus. There's been a lot going on, bringing the charger into the shop, getting things moved around, cleaning the place up and all that sort of stuff. But the real kind of sticking point and what's been keeping us from doing much is that we have been waiting on parts. Tim's been waiting on engine parts. I've been waiting on body mounts. Everything should be here soon, but I came up with a couple of ideas in terms of what we can do in the meantime. So one of the things I figured I would do is start working on the floor. I spent the whole day yesterday working on this thing. Thought I was quite smart by making up some panels and all that other sort of stuff and whatnot, and found that the metal was just too thin. I was using 20-22 gauge and it was just too floppy. It seems as though most people use 16 to 18 gauge for floor panels. The other stuff is usually body metal. So I went up to see my buddy Greg at Tri-Town Welding, gave him my template that I had made up, and he bent up some better panels for me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reuse some of the old metal for the curves in here and to bring it back into the floor. I cut it out, kind of not anticipating exactly which direction we were going to go, but I'll be able to get it all back in and hopefully make it look nice. Another huge accomplishment too, and this was the unfortunate thing, was that I shot last week and I completely lost all the footage. Two was that the air compressor is finally fixed after all this time. I think what I'll do is I'll throw back to a montage. I've got a little bit of footage that was able to be saved, and basically what happened was I had to pull the heads apart and replace some gaskets in them. One was blown, so it wasn't building enough pressure and it just run forever and overheat. So pulled that all down, replaced everything, put it back together. One held fine, but the other blew again. So then I went and just made my own gasket for it, and by tracing out the one of the ones that I had ordered, and everything seems to be holding up so far, which is great because that means that we can go back to using some of the air tools that we hadn't been able to use over the last little while. So that's where things are at. I'm gonna get it on this car. I'm gonna trim these panels up first, like I said, get them to fit just perfectly, and then I'll get into sewing everything back together. Both plates are in now, sitting down where they need to be. There's a gap back there. I'm gonna have to figure out how to fill that in, but have a look. These guys here cover everything up nice. Right here, seat's going back on, so we're not going to see that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make some measurements, and I'm going to start just chipping away at this side to see how I can put the old section back in and line it back up and how everything's going to work. So I'm going to grab this old chunk over here, beat it back into shape because it got bent, and then we'll start poking around. So we got the one side kind of massaged in there. The other one's going to be a little bit more complicated because there's a lot more pieces to throw back together. As you can see, I hope it'll look all nice once it's done. So I'm going to set myself up, and then I'm going to start getting this stuff back together. So what I've got here now is basically a jigsaw puzzle. There's a other piece that's got to go over there, but just a little tiny bit of it. So I'm gonna get these two guys together.
There it is.
So I managed to Frankenstein this guy back together out of the pieces that I could find that I had cut out of the floor originally. It turned out not too bad, and it's definitely going to do the trick. I'm pretty sure it'll fit, but let's go take a look and see. And there we go. It's back in, of course. Gaps and all that sort of stuff. I'm gonna have to do some bending and some snipping, but it's the same thing with all this stuff back here. It's gonna have to play around with. We've mentioned it many times before, and this isn't something that we've ever done before. If I had to do it again, would I leave the floor in? Probably. Yeah, I think I would maybe do it a little bit differently, but this will work. I mean, it's supposed to be a rat rod, right? Next up, I'll come back and I'll start getting a lot of this stuff into place, and hopefully relatively soon we'll have this back in one piece. We'll have our parts, and I can go back to working on the frame mounts. And I think one of the hardest things to do sometimes is to show mistakes that you've made. I made a bunch of mistakes yesterday, and it drove me nuts last night after I went home. So that's why I came back and did it again. But the whole thing is I have to remind myself all the time, it's a learning process. With more practice, I'm gonna get better with it. And sooner or later, the harder stuff is just going to seem super simple, and I'll go back and I'll think to myself, you know, why did that seem so hard in the first place? But it's because I've gotten the hang of it. And that's something I think that everybody should remember when they're working on this sort of stuff. Don't give up, and it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to waste some material, and it's okay to start over again. So after a week or two hiatus, I'm back at the shop. Gonna get finished up on the floor. So I'm gonna start on the far side. It's kind of the easier spot. The pan seems to fit the best compared to the other ones. I've got to deal with this gap. I mean, I'm fine with that. We'll kind of cut away and whatnot. Got some supplies. So got the big grinder back in business. That's going to be a big help, because that way I can take some of the rough edges off of those floor pans. Floors are getting there. The one side is done, stitched back in. Looks okay. Doesn't look amazing by any means. This one, same story, starting to get there. Got a little bit more left to do on it for sure. Got to grind this down, clean it up, make sure everything is nice and tidy for when I start welding again. This guy needs to be patched back in, or sorry, this guy needs to be tacked in. Just need to do some trimming and stuff like that on that as well. So I will save that sort of finish work and cleanup for another episode. As always, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure to click the subscribe button and like to keep up to date with what's going on the channel. We've got all sorts of stuff coming up. Even some more with this guy. Thanks, folks.